Let's dive into one of history's great, kind of mind-blowing paradoxes. It's the story of a people who were totally looked down on, called uncivilized barbarians, and who then rose up to build one of the most legendary empires the world has ever known, Babylon.
So, get this. This is how the sophisticated, city-dwelling Sumerians actually saw the Amorites. To them, these people were just wrong. They lived in tents, they didn't know the proper way to worship the gods, and they ate raw meat. This wasn't just some casual insult. This was deeply baked into their culture, into their myths.
So that's the big question, right? How did a people who were so completely despised, seen as nothing more than primitive nomads, somehow manage to take over and build upon the ruins of the very empire that looked down on them? Well, it's an absolutely incredible story of collapse, adaptation, and sheer ambition.
Okay, so to really get the Amorites' rise, first we've got to understand the world they were stepping into. And that world was dominated by the Neo-Sumerian Empire, specifically the third dynasty of Ur. Now, this wasn't just any old kingdom. This was the superpower of its day. Incredibly centralized, bureaucratic, and, it seemed completely invincible.
For more than 100 years, the Ur-3 dynasty was the definition of order and power. It was founded by Ur-Nammu and then taken to a whole new level by his son Shulgi. For decades, it was all about stability, prosperity. It was at its absolute peak, right before the pressure started building, and the whole thing came crashing down with honestly shocking speed.
King Shulgi's level of control was just unreal. He wasn't just a warrior king, he was a master organizer, a micromanager on an imperial scale. He created a state where everything, I mean everything, was run from the center. The economy, the military, he even standardized time with a new calendar. He set up schools to train an army of loyal scribes, and to top it all off, he declared himself a god. This was a civilization at the absolute pinnacle of its complexity.
But, while the Sumerians were busy perfecting their spreadsheets and building their bureaucracy inside this perfectly ordered world, there was another group of people living a very, very different life just outside. It's time to properly meet the Amorites.
The Sumerians called them the Martu. The Akkadians called them Almarum. These were West Semitic-speaking peoples, mostly herders and pastoralists coming from the lands to the west, what we'd think of as modern-day Syria. And what's really important here is that the name Amorite eventually became this catch-all term for pretty much any of these nomadic tribes pushing in from the west.
And wow, the culture clash could not have been more dramatic. On one side, you've got the Sumerian world, built on permanent cities, written laws, and state-controlled grain silos. And on the other, the Amorite world, defined by mobile tents, fierce tribal loyalties, and where your wealth was walking around on four legs. To the settled Sumerians, this wasn't just different, it was fundamentally backward.
And this line from that same myth, it just cuts right to the heart of their prejudice. The absolute markers of a civilized life, having a proper home while you're alive and a proper burial when you're dead, the Sumerians saw these as totally alien concepts to the Amorites. They saw them as rootless people, living and dying completely outside the bounds of what they considered a decent life.
For a long time, the trickle of Amorite tribes was just a frontier issue, something the army could handle. But by the time of King Shusen, the steady, relentless pressure started to feel like a genuine existential threat to the entire Sumerian way of life. The empire decided it had to do something big. So, faced with this growing crisis that they couldn't seem to solve with their army, the Sumerians turned to what empires often do when they're scared, a massive engineering project. They decided to literally wall off the heart of their empire from the so-called Barbarians. They called it the Meriktinum, a 270-kilometer-long barrier stretching from the Tigris River all the way to the Euphrates. And there's no mystery about its purpose, because its name literally means that which keeps the Amorites at a distance. It was a giant, physical statement saying, "You are not welcome here."
But here's the beautiful, tragic irony of the whole situation. While the empire was pouring all these resources into building its Great Wall to keep the nomads out, it completely failed to realize a crucial truth. The wall was basically useless the moment they started building it.
See, the Amorites weren't just outside the gates. They were already a critical part of the empire itself. They were the hired muscle in the army. Some even rose to the rank of general. They were woven into the economy as shepherds and workers. They even brought their own unique crafts. The empire had, without fully realizing it, become dependent on the very people it was trying so desperately to wall out.
So you have this huge internal contradiction, relying on a people you officially fear and despise. And that created these deep cracks in the foundation of the empire. When the final push came, the entire magnificent structure just collapsed with breathtaking speed. For the Sumerians, it was literally the end of their world.
The fall wasn't just one thing, it was a perfect storm. The external pressure from the Amorites never stopped, and on top of that, they were getting hit by the Elamites from the east. Internally, the whole thing was falling apart. Governors were betraying the king, generals were making their own plays. The final nail in the coffin came in 2004 BC, when the Elamites sacked the capital, the great city of Ur, and dragged away the last king. That was it, the end of Sumerian power for good.
Now, when a massive, centralized power like Ur disappears, it leaves a giant power vacuum. And who do you think was perfectly positioned to step into that chaos? Yep, the Amorite leaders who had been waiting, both on the inside and right at the gates.
All of a sudden, being an Amorite wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was a source of power and identity. All across Mesopotamia, Amorite chieftains and generals started taking over the old Sumerian cities. They set up their own kingdoms, founded their own dynasties, and they proudly, publicly, traced their family trees back to those very nomadic tribes the Sumerians had hated so much.
And among all these new Amorite kingdoms was a pretty minor one at first, a city called Babylon. It started small, founded by an Amorite family around 1894 BC, and for a few generations, its kings just slowly, methodically expanded their power, picking off their neighbors, building up their strength, setting the stage for one man who was about to change absolutely everything.
And this, right here, is the culmination of the whole story, the ultimate achievement of these so-called barbarians. They didn't just stumble into a fallen world, they rebuilt it, better and stronger, in their own image, with their city, Babylon, at the center, all under their most famous king.
These are the years that matter, 1792 to 1750 BC, the reign of Hammurabi. In that 42-year span, he took Babylon from being just another regional power and turned it into the undisputed master of Mesopotamia. He created the first great Babylonian empire.
And let's be absolutely clear, Hammurabi was an Amorite king through and through. He was the sixth king of Babylon's first Amorite dynasty. He even proudly called himself the king of the Amorites. Official records actually made a point of tracing his family tree all the way back to his nomadic ancestors. They were proud of who they were and where they came from. And this brings us to the final, absolutely stunning piece of irony. Hammurabi, the descendant of the people the Sumerians called lawless nomads who ate raw meat and didn't know how to bend the knee, is the guy we remember for giving the world one of its very first and most famous comprehensive codes of law, the ultimate act of civilization from the ultimate barbarian.
You know, the story of the Amorites isn't a one-off. It reveals this powerful pattern that we see again and again and again throughout history. Think of the Romans and the Goths and countless other examples. It forces us to ask, what does civilization even mean? And it's a powerful reminder that so often the people on the margins of today's world are the ones who hold the seeds of tomorrow's.
History isn't dust, it's a journey through time. Here on History LM, we tell it simply and fast. If you love discovering the past in just a few minutes, hit like and follow History LM. Your next journey through time is waiting.